Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. After 15 years of working for 3 major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Chicago Cubs, I discovered the one thing I loved the most was helping women in sports shatter glass ceilings and take their seat at the table. I loved it so much that I made a business out of it. I have the honor of coaching high-performing women in the sports and entertainment industry and supporting them as they go after exactly what they want in their career. So if you are feeling tired of waiting on the sidelines, done being overlooked for promotions, and you're ready to pull ahead of the pack and take your career to the next level, girl, I'm here for it. I also created the Game of Her Own podcast to support you as well. We are here to share the stories of incredible women who work in sports and entertainment. These leaders and trailblazers will inspire you with their success and the lessons they've learned along the way to the top. Ladies, there is nothing like women empowering women. I am so honored you're here. TEDx speaker, Ph.D, senior vice president, head of HR. Those are just a handful of incredible descriptors for my next guest. I am sure it will blow your mind to know that during her career, someone told her, "You are not capable of being a leader." Clearly, that was incorrect, as DeRetta Rhodes is the Senior Vice President and Head of HR for the Atlanta Braves. I am so excited for you to hear about DeRetta's journey of becoming the extraordinary leader she is today. Make sure you listen for the 2 things she says that nobody can take away from you and what she would do differently if she had to go back and do it all over again. All right, ladies, let's jump in. DeRetta, welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely. So glad to be here.
Good. Okay. So I'd love it if you would take us back and looking at your career. I know it hasn't always been in sports, but I'm wondering when you first fell in love with sports and when it became an important part of your life.
Oh my gosh. So it's funny. I never played sports when I was in high school or college. I actually was a geek. I did debate competitively in high school, but always loved sports. And I actually found a love of sports with my brother who played basketball. And he's 7 years younger than me, was an amazing athlete. It actually blew his knee out right before he was supposed to go to the Nike Invitational. And so I lived vicariously through him because I was so envious of his talent. And then to watch him go through what he did, he really struggled from that standpoint because he personally made the decision not to do the Nike Invitational because if he had done anything wrong, it could have crippled him. And so, but I saw him with that fight and that thrive to get back, and he actually walked on to a basketball team in college with the College of Edinburgh. And so that's where I think it started. And again, I personally am not athletically inclined. But then during that, I also used to watch baseball with my grandfather all the time. I grew up in Kansas City, so it's hard not to have an appreciation for baseball when you've got the Black Negro League there and you learn all about it. And I listened to the stories my grandfather told about baseball, and so I watched baseball. So as we fast forward, I ended up having 2 sons, and the 2 of them play baseball. And so they started playing baseball at 5. So that was when it was off a tee, when kids were out there actually not really looking at the ball, but looking at flowers and dandelions.
Yep.
And then them actually progressing in their sport and their talent and the discipline that my sons gained from learning from a coach and just honing their own skills. And so they played from 5 years old until they graduated from high school. Interestingly enough, neither one of them wanted to play competitively. But I guess from that standpoint, I've always been around sports. Like they never wanted to, go into college with it. But I've always been around sports. And I've had this huge appreciation for what it brings around discipline, like I just mentioned, what it brings around the importance of coaching, like all of those coaching skills. I think about that when I work with leaders in an organization. And so that's where it started. And then from there, I love sports. I love SEC football. So I've gotten the kind of the range of it all. And then I married a gentleman who played golf at his college. he was just placed into the Hall of Fame for his college for golf.
Oh.
And so again, the discipline, and listen to him, like he can tell you in college, every tournament and every hole he's played and what club he used. And so I've just felt like sports provides something that I don't think anything else can around discipline and teamwork and individuality in terms of your talent and how to hone your talent. So
yeah.
And for me to be someone that doesn't play.
Yeah. Yes. But it's almost like you indirectly played, but I agree. And you know, what's interesting is when I left, I played soccer, you know, my entire childhood through college. And when I was done and I went into the professional world, I really missed having a coach. Like, I was like, I just need a professional coach now. Like, I still wanted that sense of having a coach. And so it's so interesting that you keep saying discipline. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I got. And missed it. So I have a question. How old are your sons?
They are now 22 and 20.
Okay, so 22 and 20. And how excited were they 2 years ago when you got the job with the Braves?
Oh, let me tell you, I was the coolest mom ever. Like, you know, before they wouldn't even talk to me unless it was about, when are you putting money in my account? So now it's totally different. I'm going to tell you a really interesting story about that, because my youngest son goes to Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill. And he's he has very specific views about things. Let me just say that. And to have the mom that he has, you would be surprised by them. But he came home right after they found out I was with the Braves, and, you know, they've been able to go to the games. And now, mind you, they grew up with the Atlanta Braves, right? I did birthday parties for them when they were little at the stadium.
I love that.
They are true Atlanta Braves fans because they grew up in Atlanta. So, you know, that's what they've grown up with. But my son went to some women's conference at his college, and he comes back home and he says, Mom, I have something for you. And the only thing I could think of was it was a bill, or it was something that was related to, I was going to have to pay something out. That's all I could think of. And he shows up with the shirt, and it says that empowered women empower everyone. And I felt like at least there was a glimmer of hope that all the things that we've gone through as a mother-son relationship, that I've been able to impact him in a positive way. But they love it. They absolutely love it. And they get the spoils of what that looks like. So, you know, they get the discount on all of the shirts and hats and all that. So they're having a really great time.
I love that story. That's fantastic. Okay. So tell everybody what you do and who you do it for.
Sure. Okay. So we didn't even talk about that, right? No. So I am the Senior Vice President and Head of Human Resources for the Atlanta Braves. And it's interesting because I started with them. We do it by seasons. It's not by tenure, right? So typically you do by years. I'm in my second season. And it's interesting how this path or journey has happened, because I worked at one point in time at Turner Broadcasting that was owned by the Atlanta Braves. And when I was at Turner Broadcasting, again, doing human resources, I wasn't doing sexy jobs though. So I was supporting, you know, finance and accounting, although they probably would kill me if I'm telling them that it's not sexy, but it's not. So it wasn't a sexy job. And so I was supporting a lot of our functional areas, but just knew of the leadership team. And as they were looking for an opportunity for this particular position, they knew of me well. They knew of me as well. And so it seemed to have just worked very well for me to be able to walk in and work with them.
Okay. So, and you've been in, we're going to come back to some questions about coming in and, you know, just taking on such a huge role. But you've been 23 years of professional experience, if not more, please correct me. But
and let's not age me. I know the grade. I know you can definitely see the grade, but we'll stop at 23.
It makes you feel better. I was in the bathroom, like trying to cover up my gray before this, knowing that nobody can see us but just you, but it's fine. We both look fabulous. But all this experience in the human resource world, with all this executive experience, what is it about that space, the space that you love?
So, I love that question. I will tell you, when I started, I didn't even think I would go into human resources. I have an undergraduate degree in hotel restaurant management. I thought I was going to be running hotels. And so I had the chance to go work for, at the time, it was PepsiCo Yum Brand, in a rotational program. And it was on the restaurant side. And in that role, I got to see how you do recruiting. I was a recruiting lead for one of the restaurants. And that's where it started. And so it's funny, what I love, now it's a double-edged sword. What I've loved about HR, and I really do feel like we help support the human capital and influence what happens in an organization. What I loved about it is having the opportunity to bring teams together to work in such a way that they are making things happen. I used to tease and say, I try to make people's dreams come true. Mm-hmm. So if it's around development, if it's around coaching, if it's around wanting that next position, if you're in human resources, and to me, if you are good at what you do, you're able to influence the organization. The double-edged sword to that is that it is not one of those positions that you are going to readily get recognition for what you do. So you have to be very comfortable with it being kind of a silent role. But when you can influence organizations in such a way to make an impact, I'll give you a perfect example. As we're going through this very interesting times with the election and all of the social injustices and things that are happening, we were able to, now mind you, I'm going to say this to the extent that we already had groups of people that were working together around diversity and inclusion. But at the beginning of the year, we had launched an actual diversity and inclusion council. Some people stated that probably looked very opportunistic. That was not our purpose when we started thinking about it and started doing it. But that optics you can't necessarily get away from. But we started having conversations around elections and what that meant. And I was able, along with our Diversity and Inclusion Council, influence our executive team to have the presidential elections as a company holiday. Those are the type of things when you start thinking about the impact of individuals and how you're able to influence teams and leaders and people in a very positive way. That's, for me, why I've stayed in human resources. And, again, double-edged sword, you're not going to necessarily get instant gratification, but I've been able to see people that have worked with me that have grown into amazing roles as GMs and VPs and SVPs, or people that have worked for me that have done the same thing. And that's what I really enjoy about it,
mm-hmm. You said something interesting. You said something about the silent role, which I 100% understand. And then the instant gratification, right? That's not there with the work that you're doing. But how do you, because I know you don't mean that means that you're not using your voice. So how do you advocate for yourself as you're coming up? Yes, personally. Like, how do you, because you're doing this great work and you are behind the scenes, and how are you using your voice to advocate?
What I would say is that I do a great job. So I'll give you a perfect example. I talk to women all the time about giving themselves grace. Like, we don't give ourselves enough grace with things that we do. We typically are ones that take one mistake and think that's going to be the end of the world. And mind you, I just did that 2 weeks ago. So I talk about that. And I talk about this internal churn as a female leader that you do because you feel like either you're not enough or you're not doing enough or I've got to do more. And I have to check myself. I really do. Like, I have to check myself and say, okay, at what point is enough? Mm-hmm. And so, but I struggle with that. I'm going to tell you the funniest thing about me going back and getting my doctorate. And I tell people all the time when I introduce myself, people are like, oh my gosh, you have your doctorate. Do I call you Dr. Rhodes? And I'm like, no, DeRetta, because that's who I am. That degree doesn't make me, but what it has done from my perspective is given credibility in spaces that I may not have been given credibility. Mm-hmm. And so it's so funny. My mother made the comment when I graduated. She's like, okay, you do realize it's called a terminal degree for a reason? Like, that's it. Like that's the last degree. And it was this conversation around, when are you going to observe that you're enough? And I coach it all the time. I talk about it all the time. I talk about having grace all the time. And I have to also stop myself and do the same thing. So going back to voice. So what does that mean? That means that you always place yourself in a position where you are, I wouldn't say defending, but at least making sure people know your accomplishments, and you thinking about what those accomplishments are, and always give yourself some breath around that. But it's hard. I can't say to you, like I said 2 weeks ago, I was kicking myself about something, and it was truly a mistake I did.
Yep.
I got for it. It was a mistake.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I'm also human. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm walking around telling people to give themselves grace, I have to give it to myself.
What does that look like, to give yourself grace? What does it look like to you?
Okay, just to stop for a minute, breathe. Mm-hmm. And I always think about, okay, what's the worst that could happen? So if the worst that could happen is that they fire me, okay, then I'll get another job. Or if the worst that could happen is that I'm not selected for something, okay, that's fine. That wasn't meant for me. So you always have to stop and just say, okay, what's the worst that could happen in this circumstance? The other thing, and this is not my quote, but I love it. What's somebody going to do? They can't eat you. So at the end of the day, so I love that, because it's like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, why? And so I just think giving yourself just breathing for a moment. I got the best advice from a coach of mine, mentor of mine, in another job. And I was struggling in the job. I really was. I was working for a leader. You can say she didn't like me. You could say that maybe I didn't have the skills, whatever it was. But it was this one particular situation where she had given me really, really harsh feedback that I'll never forget. One of them being that you will never be a leader in an organization was one of them. This particular person knew that I was having the meeting with the woman. She called me at my desk and she said, "Hey, how are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing well." I said, and I can't, so I'm in an open cubicle. So it's not like I could, have a conversation, and I'd be damned if I was going to cry. Not in front of everybody, right? So she said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm not doing good." She said, "This is what I need for you to do. I need for you to pack up your things, and I need for you to go home." She said, "I need for you to just take a moment." And she said, it doesn't matter what excuse you give or whatever you tell them, but tell them you have to go home, because you will not be able to have the strength to fight another day if you don't. And I was like, wow, you're right. So that's what I did. So a lot of time, like if I get to that point, that's what I will do. I will just have to retreat. And there have been times where I was having a really bad day at another organization, and it was bad. It was a bad day. I came home with shoes, everything I had on, coat, whatever, got in the bed and put the cover up to here.
Oh, dear.
Like it was a bad day. It was
that's a bad day. Okay.
Shoes and everything. I had everything on. Oftentimes in situations where you're forging, sometimes you need to just stop for a minute and retreat, because I think that gives you a moment to kind of exhale and then pivot and think differently on how you're going to deal with it.
It's interesting. And I'm assuming that you're talking about anything, right? Like, wherever you are in that moment, you can be an assistant, a coordinator, an EVP. It does not matter. I remember, and I always laugh when I tell this story. I walked into work, and we had just been grinding. And I walked in, and mind you, I'm an introvert, so it's tough for me. Like when I am vulnerable, and then you're in the middle of a 10-game homestand, and I just don't have a minute to be alone. So I walked in, and I did a lap, my normal lap. I say hi to my colleagues, and then I stopped. The last stop is my boss before I go to my office, and I stopped at his office, and I said, "Yeah, I can't do this today." And he goes, "What?" I go, I got to go home. I mean, I am fully dressed, like ready to work, and I'm like, I got to go. And to this day, I don't know how that landed with him, but I was actually really proud of myself, because I honestly, I was like, you know what? I don't think I've taken a personal day in the 15 years that I've worked in baseball. So today's the day. The next day I felt great.
Yeah. And that makes a difference. So I think thinking about that, taking vacation And when you take vacation, like take it. And I can't tell you that I'm the one to tell people to do that either. I'm not great with that, but I just think having that opportunity to just be introspective and just retreat for a while.
It makes a world of difference. I love the thought behind, and this is something that I've had to do, is just the pause. And I learned this early on in my career, like by accident, really. Like it was either I was going to like fail, or I had to figure out how to deal with like the overwhelm. For me, it was anxiety and self-doubt. But at that time, I had no label for it. So, I would do the pause and breathe and like think, like get curious, like what is it that's bothering me? What's going on? And I don't know if you go this far as well, and I will write it down. And I do the same thing with my clients, just write it down and get it out. And I say the same question to myself, just like you, what is the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah.
What makes it I don't want to say makes it go away, but just you're like, oh, that's not going to happen.
And you know what the thing is, when I was a single mom, because I got divorced when my sons were 8 and 10, my biggest fear was losing my job and not being able to support them, right? So it was this whole thing of fear of failure. That's not realistic because, oftentimes in the midst of a failure, you find the brightest thing that ever happens. So I really had to start thinking and pivoting differently. But that was scary for me, to like, if I lose this job, but then I thought if I lose this job, that means I could possibly get another one that's even better.
Yes. It's all about your perspective. Absolutely. So I know you did a TEDx talk.
I did.
That was what year are we? Like, so a few years ago, right? And some things that stuck out to me when you kick it off with saying, why do I feel diminished? And then you say it several times that people told you you're not capable of being a leader. And when I heard that, I was like it just broke my heart. And you hear stories like this all the time. It just broke my heart. So can you just talk a little bit why it was important for you to do that TED Talk and why people who are listening to this should, when they're done, go to the show notes and click on the link to your TED Talk?
My TED Talk was all stemmed or steeped from my research. And it's interesting because the research is about the survival techniques of Black women executives in corporate. And because I lived it and probably still live it every single day with everything that I would receive around, like I just told you the story of that particular leader saying you're not capable of leading, or when I went through my doctoral program, them saying, you're going to do all the dissertation because you're going to be ABD because you're not committed. The topic was important to me because I think if you look at that and you compare it to the numbers of women and women of color on boards, in the C-suite, things of that nature, there's a huge deficit. And the other side of that is that there's so many of us that highly educated, high experience, and we don't get that opportunity for various different reasons, exposure, access, And so it was important for me to continue to tell that story because it hasn't changed. That number that I talk about, that 4%, I graduated with my doctorate in 2010. That number has not changed at all.
Wow.
Specifically for women of color.
Wow. 4%. Now, so the 4% in your TED Talk, you talked about Asian, Black, and Hispanic women hold 17% of corporate jobs. And then of those women, 4% of Black women holds leadership roles. Is that right?
That's right.
And so that's the 4% you're referring to, right?
Yeah. And so when you think about that and you look at the numbers and you know the numbers of individuals that are going back to getting their advanced degrees. I mean, the numbers are large for, Black and brown women, and we're not in those leadership positions. We're not influencing at tables that we should be at. I listened to someone about a week ago. She had this really cool poster, and she said, if you don't have a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair. So going back to why was that important? Because I live it every day. That is an experience. It's so funny. I was on a call with a gentleman this morning where they're in process. So for November is Native American Heritage Month. And we're in the process of doing a whole list of curriculum and learnings for the organization. And he gets on the phone with me. He says, oh, DeRetta, I looked at your background. You're very accomplished. I don't see myself that way. Like it goes back to not having enough or not doing enough or not whatever. I don't see myself that way. Like I constantly feel like I'm fighting through those things that those people said that I talked about in my TED Talk. And I know if I'm going through that and people say, oh, look at what you've done, I still don't see myself that way. It goes back to, I don't know what movie it was, where like my parents probably see me still as that 5-year-old with, ponytails, right?
Sure.
All right. So I don't see myself as accomplished. I see myself as determined. I see myself as very focused still on the things that I think that are important. I just want people, and when I say people, I want people that look like me to have opportunities to get to their highest potential. So it goes back to the question you had asked me before about why did I do HR? That's why. I have to oftentimes have this conversation with people about the fact that HR is actually good overhead. Because sometimes you're having a fight about the importance of HR. People don't want to talk to HR. But if you are dealing with and understanding the people capital of any organization, then you are able to provide a construct with which people can see themselves developing and getting to their highest potential. That's what I love about what I do.
Wow. Hey, Game of Your Own listeners. I got a story for you. After grad school, my goal was to work in sports. I was lucky enough to be selected as one of 25 Fenway ambassadors with the Boston Red Sox. Ladies, 4,000 people applied. I had less than a 1% chance of being selected. That's how I got my start in sports. I quickly realized that this is the department I want to work in. The problem was there were no full-time positions within that department. So it was the first time I had to advocate for myself at work. Not only to become a full-time employee, but also create a position that didn't exist. Y'all, it worked. You can hear more about my journey in sports in episode 25, Flip the Script. But the reason I tell you this story is it doesn't matter what level you are in your career. I know you want to be seen and heard at work, and you should be. It starts with advocating for yourself. I've done it my entire career in sports because guess what? Nobody else was going to do it for me. You with me? Are you ready to stop being overlooked for opportunities? Are you ready to smash that glass ceiling and take your seat at the table? Are you ready to show your boss the value that you bring every single day? If yes, join me for my free webinar, Be Seen and Heard at Work, on December 10th at 11:30 Central. In the show notes, you'll find a link to register and save your seat. I can't wait to share my 5 simple tips that will help you better advocate for yourself. Ladies, you will no longer be overlooked for opportunities. This is so interesting. So you see yourself as determined, but not accomplished. Mm-hmm. And when I'm doing my, prepping for today and our time together, I see the complete opposite, like very accomplished and wish that we worked together at some point in our career, And it's almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I heard this in your TED Talk, it's almost like you see yourself as a survivor. Is that right?
Yeah, I see myself as a survivor. And so I'll tell you the interesting story about that is I was going through a doctoral process is painful. And one of the things is they were splicing up the topic that I had. It's like, cutting up your baby and giving it back to you. As they were splicing up my title and splicing up the research and what I wanted to do, we started out with success factors. Dr. Juanita Johnson Bailey, who was at the end of my whole entire journey, was my chair. She looked at me as we were carving through the research, and she said, this is not about success. She said, I need for you to look at what these women have said to you. This was not about success. This was about surviving. This was about thinking of ways to make sure, because we have all of these roles that we play, home, community, and everybody's looking at you to make sure that you're standing up to that standard that people have placed on you. This is not about success. This is about surviving. So when we started breaking down the themes of each of my participants, and I was one of them as well, you found every woman that I talked to there was a level of desperation, a level of weariness, a level of I'm just tired that you heard, if not in their voice, but in their word. So when we started, again, looking at it further, she said, we've got to call this what it is. It is surviving.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I don't know how to tell you how that shifts. And I struggle from the standpoint that, again, so we go back, I'm very determined, I'm focused. I've gotten feedback from mentors who said, you need to be careful because you're high energy, you're charging the hill, but if you have no one behind you to charge the hill, that's not a leader. So I had to start thinking around, I can't put this same level of stress and pressure on someone else because everybody has to have their own pace of their rate. But I have to be able, if I'm going to be good at leading people, I have to be able to have them have their own lane. Mm-hmm. And they determine how they run that lane. Because my motivation may be very different. Now, at some point in time, I've got to shift that from survival to thriving, right? I have to at some point figure out, okay, I am thriving. But I don't know when that would be if the numbers continue to be the way they are, if there are not opportunities that we see women, Black and brown women in them.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about this is that you are super vulnerable in telling us, I don't know how to shift it yet. Like I'm in it. I'm still in it, trying to figure out how to go from survivor to thriving. Mm-hmm. And it sounds to me, though, the action that you are taking and that others can take are how you're treating other people right now and leading other people, right? Like, so yes, you're doing your work for you, but like you're also doing it for others and helping them. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and giving others grace. So if I'm mentoring other women, and I tell them all the time, it's a partnership. So, people are like, oh, I want you to mentor me. I'm like, no, you'll be mentoring me too by the time we're done. Watch. Just so you know, because my thing is that it's a partnership. There's so much that I've gained from women that are, younger than me in experience or age that, has been instrumental for me. And so it is, for me, I always want to talk about that grace stuff because we don't give ourselves grace. We just don't. Mm-hmm. I can describe it as I can see it in someone else. I can't see it in me. It's kind of that whole phrase, Dr. Heal Thyself. So I can look at it as somebody else, but I can't see it in me. And so I do have to have checks on, okay, wait a minute, DeRetta, you probably are being a little excessive here.
And then thinking about the giving yourself grace, I'm sure this comes up all the time with either you or people who work for you, is just dealing with self-doubt, imposter syndrome.
Yes.
What advice would you give women who are listening right now who are like, I can't give myself grace? There are sometimes, I've never shared this with anybody. There are sometimes that I think I'll see a quote about self-doubt and I'm like, this is great, but it doesn't apply to me because mine's for real. Mine's serious. You know what I mean? Like, what I'm thinking is actually real. And that's the conversation I have with myself. And so, right. Which is why I have a coach. But what advice would you give women who feel like they're in that space?
So it's funny you asked that. I was just working with a woman that I'm mentoring in a program with. We talked about that because I asked her, what did she feel like her barriers were? Because I always ask that question because I also think about what my barriers are and what are the ones that I can impact and what are the ones that I can't. And one of the ones that we talked about, it was about the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome. And I said to her, let's unpack that. So why do you think you're an imposter? So if you are degreed, you have this education, you have done all of these things, why are you assigning imposter to yourself? So I think what we have to do is we have to unpack it, right? We have to unpack, why are we saying that? And I can tell you, for me, I know why I say that. Because what happens is I can continue to hear the records in my head of what people that were not for me or not positive, what they've said. And in some ways, it's motivated me to, I'm going to show you, right? But in other ways, it can be debilitating because when you listen to those records in your head, it impacts how you approach things. I have to sometimes get out of my head the things that I've heard, that although I'll repeat them, I have to remember, okay, what was said on the positive side of this, or what have I done on the other side of this? I talk to people about, and I have to do this for myself on the imposter syndrome, is that I need you to write your list of accomplishments. Just write them down. Just write the list. And you'll be amazed. And if you keep a running list of your accomplishments, so if you do a journal, you keep a running list of your accomplishments, what happens is that you can pivot what those records in your head are juxtaposed against what that list says. But you've got to be intentional with that. It's like I write down, I used to be really good with this, and I have not done this since I started with the Braves. I need to go back and readdress this. But I would write down my 3 blessings of the day.
Yes.
What are my 3 blessings of the day?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can operate from my 3 blessings of the day, then I'm winning.
So you start your morning off with that?
I try.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the other problem. So let's talk about that. Yeah, I try. As long as I don't pick that phone up and look at emails before I can even, because think about what you put in before you can even, excel out. So if I can positively sit down and say, okay, these are my 3 blessings before I read those emails for the day,
mm-hmm.
that make a difference.
Yes. My best days, I do not get it right every day, but my best days are when I wake up and only look at my phone to shut off my alarm. And then I go have my coffee, and then I do 10, a gratitude journal. So 10 things that I'm grateful for the day before. If it's been a while, the week before. And then, and then I work out. I usually post something to Instagram, but don't scroll, post something work related. And then I work out. And those are the best days. But you're right. It's hard to do.
I woke up this particular morning and I was like, it's going to be a bad day. I'm not looking forward to it, yada, yada, yada. That's how I started, like Eeyore, Winnie the Pooh. Okay? That's how I started the day. I got to the office and I started going through this list of things that I needed to do, one of which, now this was a Monday, and I'm calling one of my colleagues and I'm like, oh my gosh, this happened. And I go back and talk to my CEO, and he's like, wait a minute. If you knew about this on Friday, why are you telling me on Monday?
Uh-oh.
I'm like, the course of the rest of that day, for bad. The rest of the day, which then impacted me to say, oh, now that I've done that, then that has to equal that I'm a bad employee, which has to mean that they're going to look to get rid of me. Like, you go down this whole, like, you get out the car and run down the street.
And how do you reverse that in that moment, right? Like,
it's hard to reverse in that moment.
Or how do you stop it from?
So that's a great question. So I called a colleague of mine. I said, listen, I did something really bad. And she's like, I'm sure it's not that bad. I said, I think it's really bad. I made a mistake. She's like, oh my God, people make so. She's like, what are you talking about? So I talked through it with her. And when I got to the other side of that, I said, okay, this whole day I have been completely irrational. Like the whole day. So I think you have to stop and have somebody help you level set. That's what I had to do. And then the next day I didn't get up and say, this is going to be a bad day.
Yes. That is key. I don't know why you told the universe what to do.
Right. So, and you know what? And the universe let it happen. So you have to make sure that, I have a really good colleague of mine. He and I have worked together for a long time, and he came to work with me here at the Atlanta Braves. And he talks about energy all the time. Art talks about energy all the time. He says you have to conserve your energy. You can't let just anything come in and usurp that. And so that's what I have to do. And some days I do it really well and some days I don't. So it's funny, you said that you're an introvert, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I am too, but I don't read as an introvert. Like people don't see me as an.
Do people argue with you and tell you that you're an extrovert?
Absolutely.
Okay, me too.
And I'm like, so if I were to give you the report, you would know exactly what it meant, because I can show up as an extrovert. Like, I can do this. I can speak in large groups. I can engage in a room. I'm tired after I'm done. And I have to really think through to get to the next thing. Like, after we get off this call, I have a meeting that I have to conduct. And I have to gain some more energy. But when I'm done after that call, I can't do another one.
Yes. Yes, and it's knowing that about yourself that is so critical and will help you so much. Like when I learned that, okay, I can't do more than 2 podcast interviews a week.
Yeah.
And then once I had enough in the bank, I was like, oh, I only need to do 1 a week. That is it. Why am I killing myself to 1 a week is fine. Coaching sessions, I don't do more than 3 a day because I give so much to my clients that that's it. They take all my energy and they get it. Right? They deserve it, but that's all I have.
So I think that energy piece and what you bring in is what you're going to get out.
Yes.
And that was definitely a bad day, but I called it. I won't do that again.
Yeah. I actually wake up and someone told me this about a year ago, get up and say it's going to be a great day. And I was like, okay. And so I actually have been doing it for the past 2 weeks. I don't know why. I said it one morning and I was like, today's going to be a good day. And I could just feel it. And so I was like, I got to keep this up. So I've been doing it every single day for 2 weeks. It takes literally no energy and it actually like wakes me up and I'm like, yeah, all right, let's go do this. But you're right. You got, like you said, you have to be intentional about it and you have to believe the words that you are saying.
Are coming out your mouth. Yeah.
Yes.
So it goes back to you asking about the dissertation journey, you didn't ask about that, but the TEDx. Mm-hmm. Because of the work I do, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I have to think about that with every encounter, with every situation, with every opportunity to be on a podcast, with every opportunity to speak with someone. Yes. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so I look at it that way. So if I can, because it's so funny, I had someone just randomly, because I do a lot on LinkedIn. I do a lot of things like this and try to just get out there. And a woman that I met 3 years ago at another job who was on the board sent me an email because I'm doing a project for another organization, sent me an email. And she said, hey, I've been seeing your LinkedIn and so forth and so on. They're very inspiring. Who would have ever thought? So that's why I try to make sure I take every opportunity because I want to be able to be an influencer that changes the numbers, that has organizations viewing and looking at women and brown and Black people in leadership positions, unlike I was told I would not have. I want to see that change. And so if I can continue to do this, then hopefully at some point there'll be a shift.
Yes. Yes. And I love the work you're doing. And I love what you're saying. So when we're thinking about that self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and I'm hearing you talk about some ways you can kind of manage it, right? So I'm hearing, writing down your blessings every day, right? You do 3 things. Keeping a list and being intentional about keeping a list of your accomplishments, right? And having it somewhere where you can see it.
Right.
Under your desk. Right. That's not going to help anybody. And then I have some of mine in Post-its. You can't see it, but my wall is covered in Post-its. And some of them are accomplishments and like me checking things off when I reach a goal. Phone a friend.
Yes.
Love that one. I have a rotation of about 3 to 4 people, one being my business coach as well. And you know who to go to for which things. But it's
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And then the energy. So protecting your energy is another one. Mm-hmm. Those are great. So let's shift back to when you took the job with the Braves. What advice would you give women when it comes to that whole negotiation process, accepting a job offer, the back and forth? What advice would you give them?
Be true to what you asked for. Be true to what you asked for. When I walked into this role, I left the role as an EVP CHRO at a nonprofit. When I walked into this role, it was SVP, head of HR. And so I asked the question, is there any way the title can be changed for it to be what it was before? And the answer was no, because from a structural, organizations are different. From a structural perspective, understand the work that you do outside of here, use head of HR. Every opportunity I've had, I speak to that, to the point that, before I say that, what I felt was critically important is that not only was it about the title, but it was about the body of work that I was doing. It is very difficult to argue a point if you're doing the work. If you have the body of work that you're doing and you're able to show it. I knew based on just kind of what I understood the role to be. And at the end of the day, there are some industries that highly respect and covet HR people, and there are some industries that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so being thoughtful and mindful around what industry you're in and what profession you're in and how it's viewed. And so I knew that too was something that I was having to kind of fight against, right? So it came down to, before I have any further questions about title or things of that nature, it's going to be about the body of work that I talked to you about. And with it being the body of work, I need to be okay to walk away if I'm not providing what I want. And a lot of times we're not willing to take that risk. So what we do is we sit in a role and we grind and we do this whole grind thing and churn, and they pissed me off. They didn't take that energy. And okay, if that's not what they're going to do, then take that energy and think about something else that you could do. Do board work that gives you, again, a body of work that you can speak to, that others then can speak to you about. It just figure out a way to build that body of work that you can speak to, that is yours, that no one can take away from you. Mm-hmm. Because I say to people all the time, there are two things people can't take away from you: your experience and your education. They can't. They don't have to like it. They don't have to like you. They don't have to like what you've done, but they can't take that away. And so even today, I'm having those same type of conversations. But the body of work is so important. But you have to have your voice because at any given time, another example, any given time, like my CEO said, "Are you happy?" I said, "For the most part." "What do you mean for the most part?" "Well, let me tell you why. Let's go back to the conversation that we had when I started 2 years ago." Because he said, "Well, if you need to think about it." No, I don't need to think about it because I have been on 10 right now this conversation. So it is the body of work, being prepared to have the conversation when the conversation is presented to you. I mean, all of those things are critically important because I also think it speaks to your brand. Yes. So I can speak about the body of work I do all the time, because I'm doing the work, This time during pandemic and during social injustice probably was the most optical heightened time for individuals that are in the HR profession. Not the most heightened time, the most optical.
Yes.
Meaning organizations now, whereas before they may have passed, don't want HR in the room. Now they're pointing to you and saying, "So what do you recommend we do?" It's one of I liken it to, let's go back to the sports thing. I have the opportunity to play the winning shot and now I'm going to do it. That's what that is.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And so when you start looking at it and thinking about that, always making sure you're prepared and doing your body of work so you can present it at any point that you need to present it.
I love that. I love, and this is a question that it's an interesting one. I get an interesting reaction from it, but we actually have a listener who submitted a question. So Courtney, thank you for listening. Courtney would love to know, how do you go about making sure you're paid the same as your male counterpart?
So what you have to do first is do the research, understand what the market data is saying, provide that. The other thing I always say to people, because yes, it's easy to say, you know what, Mark is making 10% more than me. Well, guess what? This conversation isn't about Mark. It's about me. This is the market data. This is where I know I should be. This is where I am. I have a concern with the deficit, and this is the body work that I'm bringing to you because that's what I'm deserving to get this. Because understand, it's an exchange. When someone is giving you a salary, they're exchanging that salary for the body of work or the work that you're doing. So what you need to do is explain, this is what I'm doing. And this is why this equation to this should be this. I just would not get caught up in talking about comparatively to others. Yes. I would talk about it comparatively to me and the body of work that I'm doing for you, what I am bringing to the table, what I am offering, and do all those other things. I'm on this board. I do this charity. It's all of these things that you need to bring, because a lot of times we don't bring that to bear. When we're having these conversations. And the work that you're doing outside of an organization is actually making them look good. So you have to start thinking of it that way, but do your research first. And now you can go in at any time, PayScale, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, all the comp stuff where you may not have been able to get it before, you can get it now. Yeah. And you can easily have that conversation. And a lot of times I also say to people, don't just look at your base salary, look at other things as the variable comp of your job, whether it's benefits, where it's tuition reimbursement, whether it's getting car allowance, phone allowance, whatever those other things are. make sure that you are not just being so myopic around the fact that it's just base. Take a look at every single level that is going to expand your total compensation.
That's great advice. I mean, and you could have just said the first line and been done. Like, just, it's not about him. It's about you and your body of work. So Thank you. I'm going to steal that a lot. I'm a storyteller and I talk about it too long. You just said it in one nice, great sentence. I'm going to steal that. DeRetta, tell us as we end here, what's one thing looking back that you would do differently?
The one thing I would have done differently is I would have bet on me sooner.
Yes.
Oftentimes I waited. I didn't want to have that conversation yet because I thought it was going to put me in a poor light. I would have bet on me sooner.
I like that. That's good advice for others too, right? Bet on yourself right now. And DeRetta, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, how could they go about doing that?
Please go to my LinkedIn. I'm out there with my full name, and go on my Twitter at Dr. DeRetta. I would love to connect. Absolutely love to.
Fantastic. DeRetta, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.